Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see you. Uh, it might be a morning for you, it might be an evening or a day. So, wherever you are, welcome to this introduction to OpenNebula operation sessions. My name is Alexei, but yeah, feel free to call me Alex or Alexei, whatever suits you. And I'm a technical trainer at OpenNebula Systems. So, I hope I'm loud and clear, and let's dive in. Before we'll begin, I can remind you, if you would like to follow up whatever we're going to do here, it's important for you to run an OpenNebula installations, as was asked to do so. So if not, then for the next session, if you like, feel free to jump and download Mini One and install OpenNebula with basically a one command line. All right, so let us begin with our agenda. What are we going to discuss today is, well, we're going to discuss Sunstone, what it is, how to use it, how it looks, how it feels, and all that. We're also going to touch a little bit on settings, the user settings, user preferences, what you can configure there, and what you actually would like to have there. We're going to discuss virtual networks, what kind of networks OpenNebula supports, how you can configure them, and we're also going to set up a little bit of change in the Mini One, as well as we're going to discuss marketplace and apps. What is marketplace? What are the apps? How to use them? How to get them? So this also going to be discussed and shown. Virtual machine templates, that's quite important thing. What are VM templates? How they relate to images and how to use them. As in the end of the day, we're here to actually launch something. So we are going to launch the virtual machine using the OpenNebula. So open your Sunstone or open your web UI of your installation of OpenNebula and let's dive in. Now, the first thing is Sunstone, right? So that is the graphical user interface. Now, at the moment, with the version 6.10, we have two Sunstones. One is a newer one, and one is the older one. Still, you can run them both, but transition to the Sunstone that runs on the port 2616 is highly appreciated because you'll get a little bit more modern user experience. What else it has the built-in password-based MFA, so you don't need any third parties. You may just use your authenticator, whatever you're using, Bitwarden, Google Authenticator, or whatever generates the time-based passcode that would be suitable. And it's the same entry point for every user that's going to use OpenNebula. So from the administrators, from the super admins, the one that can do whatever they want, down to the cloud users who are actually just deploying some machines, do some minor changes, but overall not messing around with the settings. So all that would be the same Sunstone. Now, if we look at Sunstone, as soon as you land in, and again, please, if you install with Mini One, you're actually running two Sunstones. So the new one and the older one. This webinar is based on a newer OpenNebula version. So please make sure that you're using port 2616. Of course, in your production setup, you may proxy this one using some popular reverse proxies like Nginx, Apache, HA proxy, whatever suits your needs. Now, I'm going to use one admin as my user, and typically one admin, if you haven't altered anything, that is the default super administrator. So this user can do whatever you want. You basically get the rights. Typically like root on Linux, right? Of course, once you logged in, you are going to see a welcome screen or a dashboard with 4 quick shortcuts to kind of for easier navigation, right? So you can quickly jump to your virtual machine templates, quickly jump to your VMs, quickly jump to your images, or I mean, whatever shortcut is. If you need more, then there is the left-hand panel on the left, and that actually gives you access to all your infrastructure of OpenNebula. Now, that is the view for the administrator. So we have more views. These are the default views. That means that you actually can create your own views as well as alter the default ones. Although I don't recommend to alter defaults, better to create your own ones with your settings and keep the default ones that are bundled with the installation as is. So in case you mess up something, you always can refer to the built-in that works for 100%. Now, we have 4 built-in views: administrator, group admin, user, and cloud. Now, for all folks who are familiar with OpenNebula and tried the previous versions of the OpenNebula, you may remember that changing the view actually shifted a little bit of a menu panel. So instead of being on the left, it goes on top, and so on and so forth. Now, with this version of Sunstone, nothing changes that dramatically. So it's still same positioning of the virtual machines, same positioning of the toolbars, and so on and so forth. Only the tabs where you have an access, that is going to be different. So if I'm going back to admin view, I can access basically everything, right? If I'm going back to, let's say, cloud view, then the view is more simplistic, and less parts of OpenNebula can be accessed using the cloud view. Now, even though it's like a limiter, but please note that it's not a hard limitation. It's rather, let's say, soft limiter, because what you can access actually depends on your permissions. View just removes something that might be distractful for that role, but it's not going to completely restrict, because you may use command line and change whatever you want if you have the proper rights set it up. So again, this is something that we need to be aware of all the time. That this view just changes what can be accessed, but the actual permissions are calculated based on the rights of that user. Now, as the one admin, you cannot be limited. Basically, one admin can access everything, can control everything, and can do whatever you want. So again, something just to keep in mind. Now, all your settings, the user settings, can be accessed from the settings menu. And right here, you can actually tweak a little bit of the appearance. So I'm running light appearance, which is better for the webinars, but sometimes, especially if you are in low light conditions, you would like to go with the darker one. Or you may just pick the system one, and then it's going to adjust based on what your current system is configured. I'm going to switch back to light, so it appears much better on the screencast. But for your environment, feel free to select the one you want. You also can change languages. You can change your default view. So whenever you log in, if you have multiple views, you may set up that you would like to start with, let's say, cloud or with the user view. Again, totally up to you. You can enroll your secure shell public key that will be transferred to all your virtual machines. Now, every user has its own private secure shell public key, so every user is responsible for its own enrollment. Now, because we're running Mini1 and we're one admin, this was enrolled automatically during the installation. But for any other user that's going to be created after that, we need to enroll the public key manually. And as well as you can register the two-factor authentication app And you also can use labels. So labels kind of convenient way to label your resources with some specific labels, like for example, dev prod or test or whatever suits you. And then if you start, let's say, a virtual machine from the template with a label, then the virtual machine will inherit that label. So quite convenient, but the thing that you need to remember, you must create those labels first before you go and label any resource with that. So keep this in mind. You start with settings if you'd like to change labels or if you'd like to use labels, and then you go and actually uh, tag them. Now, that is our control panel. Of course, we also have command line. So if you are fancy for the command line, then feel free to switch to command line and do everything from there. It's a very powerful tool. But again, the topic of today is doing things using Sunstone. Now, virtual networks, it's something that we need to be aware when we start with OpenNebula is OpenNebula supports multiple standards of your virtual network. Supports bridge or bridge with security groups, supports the OVS or Open vSwitch implementation, also supports the extended VLAN, so VXLAN, and .1Q also supported. So all your virtual networks are visible here. So again, if you're running Mini1, you have the virtual network pre-created. So this virtual network has the FW, which stands for the firewall. So if it's FW, it means that that is a bridge that supports security groups. Now, you may switch this mode to be not the firewall, but just a simple bridge. Again, according to your needs. If you would like to use security groups, then you need to run and bridge, then you need to run the FW mode. All security groups are configured outside of the virtual network. So you go to security groups and basically treat them as the firewall, but instead of configuring your firewall inside of the virtual machine, you do it at the little bit earlier stage. Now, your virtual network has IP addresses, it has leases, so a bunch of leases that you may exclude. For example, we know that we don't want to have, let's say, the address number 2 to be leased to any virtual machine. So we can take a hold of this IP address like that, and then this IP address is not going to be attached to any virtual machine. And in our statistics, this one is going to be seen as used. So there is one IP address that is currently in use. So again, sometimes you need it, then feel free to do that. Now, virtual network is a convenient way, right? You must have a virtual network in order if you would like your virtual machines to communicate with network somehow. And you can update it and change it to anything you wish. Now, my virtual network requires the DNS to be set to something publicly accessible like 888 or 1111 or whatever. So I need to change the advanced options because in general, we can only switch it to a different type like bridge security groups, .1Q, VXLAN, Open vSwitch, or Open vSwitch with VXLAN support. But if we would like to go to something more, for example, configure the default gateway or configure the DNS, then we need to go to the next page. That's advanced options. Now, going to context, that's where you can define that. By default, it's 172.16.101, which is basically also the gateway, and that also is what was pre-configured by the Mini1 deployment. Now I'm going to switch it to Google's 8888 because I know that this type of connection is not going to be stopped by some kind of security box, as some shady DNS on a server tries to do the DNS stuff. Now it goes directly to Google, so there is no DNS proxying, and that will work. Now, please, again, if you follow, also set your domain name service to 4.8. Right, so virtual networks change. Virtual networks is not the only option, right? So with virtual networks, we can do more. We can reserve some IP addresses. Let's say if we don't want to provide this virtual network completely to some specific users, we can create a reservation. Basically, consider it as a pie. So you have a nice pie, and then you cut a chunk of it and you give it to users so they can use their own chunk of network without tapping into your main one. Right. So in order to create a reservation, just reserve it, then select the name. For example, in my case, it can be demo reservation. Then how many IP addresses you would like to reserve, the range that you would like to use, and it's quite important to also set the first IP address. Now, if you don't set it, then it will take automatically. But here might be one issue if you start to do it manually. If you set it to 2, in this case, it's going to fail, right? And why it fails? Because I already holding that IP address in my main network, so I cannot reserve that. That's why I'm going to start with 3. So as soon as I've created the network reservation, you can see that now I have 11 IP addresses already occupied. And if I'm going to the lease tab and pull it up a bit, then you will see that there is one that's on hold, and then we have a bunch of IP addresses that are reserved by another network. Now, this network is going to inherit everything from its parent, like it's going to inherit the type and so on and so forth. Now, then this network can be granted to users so they can reserve their own IP addresses. Now, you also can use network templates and give your users ability to create network based on some specific template. For example, you would like to pre-create a bridge network with security groups and then let your users create networks based on the settings you configured there. So again, quite an awesome tool that might solve some problems. Now, you have your virtual network set. You have your user set. Your user has the public key enrolled. Time to actually deploy something, right? Right. Now, you need to have something to deploy. And here, why we have Marketplace. So Marketplace is a source of pre-built images, if we can say it like that. It can be public or private, right? So Marketplace is some kind of a repository, so treat it as the repository. And we are hosting our own public repository that contains all basically ready to use, ready to run virtual machine images that you can just instantiate in a single click, and that are pre-configured to also work on OpenNebula, so ready to use, ready to go. Now, but you may also want to have your own images hosted somewhere, not on a public, obviously, and then you can benefit from creating your own public marketplace that are basically HTTP protocol or S3 buckets, so kind of can reuse the AWS if you would like to. Now, marketplaces are located under the storage. You can find them there. By default, Linux containers is disabled, and OpenNebula Public is up and running and also contains 78 images. But if we click there, there's nothing, right? So where are the images? Now, the thing is that images, also as the VM template or service templates, they all are known as apps. So then you need to go to apps and download them or import into your OpenNebula. Now, images, basically that's the image of a disk. Then virtual machine template, that's what you're going to use to actually deploy your virtual machine. And service template, that is the multi-tier service. So it has multiple virtual machines interconnected between each other, and also service is a scalable entity. Now, one of the good examples of a service would be OneKey, so OpenNebula Kubernetes Engine. So that is a service that comes with multiple virtual machine templates and also is scalable, so you can scale it up and down. Now, as I mentioned, the public marketplace contains a ready-to-use image. So it means that you can download it, you can instantiate it, and it's going to run. Obviously, if you have the underlying infrastructure for that. Well, underlying infrastructure, at least one host, right? If you have at least one host, that's it. You can already run the virtual machine and play with that. Now, by default, if you install from the menu one, you already have one template for Alpine Linux. But let us go and look for Ubuntu 24.04. So select, and you have two options. You can either download it locally or download and import it into the data store. Basically, that's what you would like to do if you would like to deploy this image. Now, when you import something like this image, it also offers you to also import the virtual machine templates. And remember, there is a little bit of a thing between the virtual machine template and image. So image itself is a copy of a disk. You are not deploying your virtual machines from images. You are deploying your virtual machine from the template. So if you're downloading an image, then most of the time you actually also would like to download the virtual machine template. And you also need to store it somewhere. As you may be aware, maybe not, we have different data stores supported. So it might be network data store, it might be local data store to this hypervisor. So, and also your data stores are of a different type. So there is a system data store that keeps the running virtual machines. There is the image data store. Image data store holds all your images. And then there is also file and kernel data store that is used to mostly keep something like plain text files and so on and so forth. Now, when you download your image, you like to download it to your image data store. Now, on the right, you already can see that there is image ID and VM template ID. So virtual machine template is something rather small and very quick. So it will appear in under your templates. So templates, virtual machine templates, basically light speed. But there is image, right? And virtual machine relies on an image. Now, in order to say that my virtual machine is ready to be instantiated, or my virtual machine template is ready to use, I need to be sure that my image is also downloaded and is in the ready state. So it might be in the different states, but you are looking for your image to be in the ready state. Otherwise, wait a little bit because, well, might be network a little bit slow and you're not just processing data that fast. So give it a little bit of time to actually get downloaded and imported into the image data store. It's quite important. Otherwise, you'll not be able to run your virtual machine templates. Right. So I already mentioned a bit virtual machine templates, right? So that you are going to deploy your virtual machines using the templates, not the images. But what are actually virtual machine templates? So virtual machine template is a set of images. It might be one image, it might be two images, might be three, might be four. Again, depends on your application. Image is a snapshot of a disk. Let's say it like that. So it might be the operating system image, but it also might be some, a set of files or maybe some kind of data or whatever you are storing there. So you might use multiple images. Now, also, virtual machine template is a set of virtual network interfaces that you'd like to be attached to this virtual machine when you are going to deploy that. So that, again, is quite important. You may attach your network after that. So some of the aspects of the virtual machine are editable after you deploy, but something you would like to pre-configure. And to some extent, if you're more on the automation side, you may would like to pre-configure as much as possible, right? And another quite important thing are parameters for the upcoming machine, like the CPU available, like the memory available. So all that is also part of the virtual machine template. Plus, there is another cool thing that I will show you called contextualization. Now, some settings can be adjusted only by the administrator. And if you are into the multi-VM deployment, as we call them services, then these multi-VM deployments are going to rely on virtual machine templates. So virtual machine template is basically the core feature that must be configured properly in order to run not only your single virtual machines, but also services. Now, another thing to be aware of, multiple virtual machine templates can rely on the same image. Because by default, majority of images are non-persistent. What does that mean? That means that instead of taking this image, move it to your KVM node, your virtualization node, and then run your virtual machine with this image, we are going to create a copy of that image, and we'll transfer this copy to that virtual to that hypervisor, right? So if your image is non-persistent, that means that multiple virtual machine templates can reuse the same image, but just in a different way. So then it is, again, totally up to you. All images are clonable, so you may clone it anytime you wish, and then change the persistency or change some other aspects and permissions. Again, everything is totally up to you. Now, virtual machine templates are right there, and you may have them as many as you wish for different use cases. And different users. So again, you can create a copy of your of the default template. Even if you would like to change some minor thing, you can just create a clone and adjust there instead of taking the vanilla template and make changes there. So in case you mess up, you know that there is some kind of a default template that you can clone once again. Well, you always can delete it and download it from the apps later. So again, it doesn't mean that if you mess up the default template, then that's it, you're doomed. No, just delete it or just download, or maybe you just download the virtual machine template with it and name it differently. That's it. So you may have the same template downloaded from the same marketplace, the same image downloaded from the same marketplace, but just with a different name. It's also possible. Now you go to update, right? So don't forget, you select your template that you would like to change and click on update. There are a few things we would like to change. Now, first, we would like to set the hypervisor to KVM, and then memory, let's increase it to 256. Now, when you configure your template, please be aware that some of the things, like for example, memory or network interface, will be adjustable by the user when the user is going to instantiate this template. Of course, you can lock some things, for example, like memory, so user cannot do that and cannot change. So if it's 256 defined at the template level, when you deploy this one, it will also be with 256. But by default, memory is adjustable, so you can just take it and change to whatever you want. Now you can instantiate this virtual machine with a different ownership, right? So you can instantiate this machine and say that the owner and the group of this virtual machine is going to be Joan or Jane instead of yourself. And you can bake it at the template level, and later you will be able to change it. You also can set up costs to run this virtual machine, right? So you can set cost to a memory, cost of the physical CPU or disk per month, and then you will be able to calculate how much this user owes you. Now we're going to proceed with KVM. Then we go to advanced options. Now that's where we have all the nice things, right? That's where we have actually storage. So we can add more disks, we can add additional image, or we can create the volatile disk for scratch data, or let's say for swap partition, we can create something that will be destroyed without any regrets. Now we also can change our network. Our network, we can attach new network interfaces. We can change the existing one. Again, this can be defined at the template level, but user later will be able to change that if user feels that it needs to. Now, another thing, and that is super cool, would be the context. So context is a very nice way how you can run commands when you deploy this virtual machine, so it already comes pre-configured, right? So you can install some software, you can change something like change configuration files, maybe pre-create some other users or connect it to a wider cluster of the virtual machines or connected to the database and so on and so forth. So you just need to add it to your start script. Now, you may also note that there is the SSH public key. So SSH public key by default set to the user variable. So when user instantiates this virtual machine, that is going to be created with its own public key that this user had enrolled in the settings. If it's going to be empty, then it's going to be empty, right? You can change it to anything else or hard code the secure shell public key. So again, totally up to you. Now let's add something like apk add Apache 2, and let's start the HTTP daemon. So since it's a shell script, we don't need to put a shebang bin bash on top of the script. But if you're running anything else, something like Python, whatever, you will need to declare it before typing your actual script. Now, you may think that's it, but no, there is a bit more to go. Now, we have also user input, where you can create some specific variables or some specific things like password that user will be prompted to input. For example, let's imagine that you configure a virtual machine with a blog or with a database. So you may prompt your user to point out to the database user, database password, and database name. So when the virtual machine is up and running, we already have pre-configured virtual machine with a database, with the user, and with the password. So, and this greatly will help you to improve the user experience. And you can make them optional, which they are by default, but you also can click and make it mandatory, so user cannot instantiate this virtual machine without inputting a variable. And then we also have the context custom variables. So context custom variables is something that allows you to set various configurables by just pointing them to the key value, like password, right? So you can set a root user password to something right here. So without typing a complex script that's going to do that. There are a bit more for that. So, and I'm going to show you in a bit that there is the context section that you can find in our documentation that contains all the variables you can use in that section to configure, for example, time zone, or to configure the username, or to configure network, or to configure host name, and so on and so forth. So let's set password to, let's say, OpenNebula. Now, it's visible in a clear text right now, but as soon as we're going to save this virtual machine template, it's not going to be clear text anymore. Also, let's set hostname, right, as we can find here. So set hostname, and let's set hostname to something like Alpine Linux, right? So now what's going to happen is that we're going to have a password from the root user, OpenNebula, and the hostname of this virtual machine as Alpine Linux. There's much more, like placement, like NUMA, like backups, like scheduled actions, like input and output, and so on and so forth. So as well as the PCI device pass-throughs, and etc., etc., etc. So all that can be configured. Now again, what you can see here is not what the user will see when it's going to instantiate a VM. So right now we are configuring, that's why we have access to literally every aspect of this template. When you're going to deploy, a view will be slightly different. Next, and let's save it. Now we just altered our Alpine Linux uh, template, and it is ready to be instantiated. So then it's going to turn into virtual machine. Now, in order to do that, you can just click play button, as I like to name it, to instantiate a VM, or you can go to virtual instances, virtual machines, and run your virtual machines from there. It's not going to be different, it's just a different place where you start, but you are going to see very the same screen when you are going to instantiate that one. So let's deploy an Alpine Linux. So you go to virtual machines, press plus button, select Alpine Linux. So first thing first, you can find a number of instances, right? So you may deploy multiple instances at the same time. Can be 2, can be 4, can be 5, can be 10. So if you don't have enough of the resources, then that VM is not going to be deployed. But the ones that can be squeezed in onto your environment, these are going to be there. Now, obviously, we also need to touch a little bit on the quotas, right? So you can quota a user, so user cannot have more than 5 or 10 virtual machines at the same time. And then the different restrictions will kick in. Not the amount of resources you have, but the amount of the virtual machines this user can run at the same time. So you also can limit like that. Now, let's deploy 2. So you can also set a virtual machine name. You can change the capacity of that virtual machine. You can again instantiate it as a different user, for example, Jane or Jack, and the group. So group is something that we also should be a little bit aware of. So thing with group is that by default, OpenNebula resource is going to inherit that to is going to inherit your primary group. So if, let's say, if I'm a user, my name is user, and my group also is set to users, then this virtual machine is going to have user as the owner and users group as the owner group. But it doesn't mean that all users in the user's group are going to get access to this virtual machine. No. By default, permissions are working that way that your virtual machine will be visible only to the owner, aka you, right? So again, this is something we kind of need to keep in mind, that these are how permissions work by default. You always can alter that. There obviously a how-to guide in the documentation, how to change that globally or how to change that per user. So feel free to check this in the documentation. But by default, all your resources are only yours. So keep that in mind. Now we go to the next page. Now we can see storage. Again, we can attach more disks. You can see network, right? So we can attach more virtual networks, or basically create an alias or alias, depends how you name it. You may create an alias there and let's say get a secondary IP address for the same network interface. You can adjust placement, right? So you can place it and make some restrictions to not to place on the hosts that that they have attributes type dev or type prod, and let's say restrict it like that. So that can be adjusted under the placement. But as you can see, there's nothing related to the context, right? Yes, because context is something that you can configure only on the template level, and it's not something that is visible to a user when you instantiate a virtual machine. And then we just need to click Finish. Now, virtual machines now are getting deployed. Each virtual machine is going to have an ID. This ID is the way how you can reach this virtual machine from the command line. Of course, you always can use the name as well, but to me, it's a little bit easier, and I would go with IDs because, well, name, then you need to escape, let's say, white spaces here and there, and if they have some special characters, you might need to treat them as well. So yeah, I would always extract the ID of that virtual machine and then going to work with this one. Now, every virtual machine has its life cycle, right? And you always need to wait until it goes to the running. So when it's running, that means that it may perform some post-deployment, but the virtual machine is booted and operating system is running. Also, you can get the IP address of that virtual machine. If multiple virtual network interface attached, then you'll be able to get multiple virtual IP addresses and just copy paste. As I mentioned before, permissions are here. So you see, only owner can use and manage this virtual machine, and group and others cannot do that. So if you want to, you can grant with more permissions. Now, you can also find a storage, right? So current storage, and you also can take snapshots from that storage. You can save this disk as an image if you'd like to, and you also can resize it. So let's say it's 256 by default, you can set it to be 10, 20, 30 gigs. So keep in mind that not every virtualization technology or combination of the virtualization technology and network storage allows you to perform some operations live. So again, consult with the documentation which one is. But let's say local KVM, you can do live operations on disks. So you always can take a snapshot. Let's take a snapshot, and you can leave it empty, and the snapshot is going to get created. So you can revert to that snapshot anytime you need. And again, you can also take the snapshot and save as an image. So if you think that it's valuable to store, then feel free to store this snapshot. And you also can snapshot the whole virtual machine. Now, you can access your virtual machine in multiple ways, right? So you can take, let's say, secure shell and SSH to your virtual machine. But what also you can do, you can VNC to that machine and to get an access to the console. Now, obviously, you need to use root in that case and OpenNebula as the password because I've configured it to be that way. Now, also, as you can see, that Alpine Linux is the host name. So my set host name configurable was treated correctly. And let's see if we can connect to that machine from command line. Here's the command line. If you are running as one admin, and if you deploy your virtual machine as one admin, you can just do one VM. Excuse me. I think I'll need to open another session to my server because probably timeout. So you can do one VM, SSH, and then the ID. And you get straight into the console of your virtual machine. Let's also try to do curl 172.16.114. And we also can see that we get back it works. So that actually means that our script that we've configured, apk add apache2 and then httpd, actually was carried out. So we got the web server installed and it is up and running, so we can curl to that. So whichever way you wish, you can connect to your virtual machine, but having that VNC is pretty good thing, because even if there are some networking issues, you always can at least to log in into your virtual machine and, let's say, troubleshoot it from there. So a very nifty feature. And that would be it. So that was basic operations, how to get from Mini One, just brand new installed, to virtual machines that are running on the with Alpine Linux. Now, feel free to experiment with Ubuntu, feel free to experiment with CentOS or any other virtual machine template that we currently have, or feel free to create your own templates. Now, let's have a look at the questions. So, so, hi, I'm a new user evaluating with Mini One, Sunstone on the port 2616. You mentioned older is running as well, and I saw that this one was already replied. Yes, that just Mini One changed that to port 80. So on port 80, there would be the older version of Sunstone. But this one currently is deprecated, so don't get used to it. Use the newer version of that. Well, yes, some kind of issues maybe here and there, but there is also the command line as the workaround, so you can use command line for that. Again, well, with networking, if you detect any kind of bug, then please feel free to report that. So if the combination of the command line works, then and it doesn't work on Sunstone, then please report bugs so our developers can take a look into that. Regarding your images, how can I prepare my own images of Microsoft Windows or FreeBSD? Yeah, so you need to basically create an image in, I don't know, VirtualBox or something, and install our packages, so the contextualization packages, so you are able to perform the post configuration. Regarding the high availability, how can I set up high availability for OpenNebula? So, I mean, it depends how you define high availability, right? Because OpenNebula itself, we call it a front-end node, but it actually much more than just a Sunstone. It also the daemon that performs the actual deployments. There are schedulers, there is a database, and so on and so forth. So if we talk about the simple Sunstone, aka Web UI, high availability, then well, 2 nodes can be considered already as high availability. Just make sure you put your proxy in front of that, so it always refers to the same FQDN. And we also actually, in the documentation, if you take a look, we have the 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 guidelines, how to configure high availability and what to consider. So again, feel free to check out the documentation. And about the tool, we don't have any kind of tool that with one click will set things up in case of high availability. So it will require a bit of your manual input. Yep, image is actually a virtual disk, as was already answered, of the virtual machine, but it may contain the bootable operating system image, but it also may contain just a set of virtual images. What else it also can contain? It can be just a blank disk that you attach and has nothing there, just a data block, right? Then you format it to a file system, and then you put some data there. So it's also possible. Again, for non-Linux, there is a contextualization package. There, it will work a little bit different. So let's say if we go to the documentation, you can see that some are supported on Linux, some are supported on Windows. So again, that is the way how our contextualization package works. You will need to install that onto your image firstly before giving that image to your users. All right. I think I've answered all the questions. Let me have a look. Yeah, so I mean, regarding the image is cloned on a specific place of the hypervisor, depends on the type of storage you're using. So in case of Mini1, that's the local storage. So basically, that means that this disk will be transferred to a system storage, and then of that KVM node, and then this KVM node is going to run it from there. But it will be a copy, not the original. If you like to work with original, then your image must be persistent, right? So you set your image to a persistent mode, but then only one virtual machine can work with this image at the same time. So, and all the changes are going to be preserved. While with the non-persistent image, if you delete the VM, whatever was done on that VM, that's it, it's gone, right? With the persistent image, it stays there. Then only one virtual machine at the same time can claim this image. And how are the automatic requirements for a VM determined? Not actually sure that I understand your question. Could you please rephrase it or elaborate it, please? I may think of that it could be when you instantiate a virtual machine, get the VM template. It has, okay, automatic requirements. Yeah, so that evaluated by the scheduler based on the predefined policies. So these are configured in the config file, and that basically, so it either looks at the way how to spread your machines across your environment, or how to pack your machines close to each other. So, but yeah, that will be evaluated by the scheduler and based on the settings of the scheduler. So that's again If you eager to learn more about that, in the documentation, you'll find a load of parameters that can be configured and how to set them and which parameter means what if we are talking about the schedulers. So yeah, feel free to do that. But again, I mean, it's always on your own risk. So make sure to back up your configuration file before changing anything there. Also regarding scheduling, just a tiny note, right? So if we go to the placement, but it also takes obviously into the account whatever you place here. So host policy or host requirement. Let's say you would like your host to contain a specific attribute and not to get deployed on top of your hosts that are, let's say, production. And while you're adjusting your template, you would like it to be deployed only on development hosts. So that also would be part of something that scheduler will take care of. All right. With that, on that note, I would like to thank you for attending the webinar. I hope it was helpful. As always, this one was recorded, so you will be able to find this and other webinars on our YouTube channel. Join the community and post your community questions there. Highly appreciated, and we love your questions. And obviously, participate in our community. Thanks for attending.